The bonfire cracked and spat sparks into the night sky, and every eye in the clearing was fixed on Elena Voss, as Damien raised his hand to silence the crowd. She had walked to this gathering expecting nothing more than the usual autumn rites. The songs, the shared meat, the quiet nods from pack members who had watched her grow up among them. She had not expected to be standing in the center of the circle, with her heart slamming against her ribs, while the man she had waited 3 years for opened his mouth to destroy her. "I reject Elena Voss as my mate," Damien said, his voice carrying over the crackle of the flames. "The bond is broken. I choose Nadia." For a moment, Elena could not process the words. They landed somewhere outside her body, as if he were speaking about someone else, some other woman who had spent 3 years training beside him, defending his territory borders, waiting patiently, through every excuse he gave for not completing the bond. She turned her head and saw Nadia standing at the edge of the firelight, a human woman, with wide eyes and trembling hands, clearly as shocked by the announcement as everyone else, though not shocked enough to step away from Damien's side. "Say something," Damien muttered under his breath, so only she could hear. "Don't make a scene." Elena's wolf clawed at the inside of her chest, desperate and confused, unable to understand why the bond it had cherished for so long was being severed in front of hundreds of witnesses. She felt the pull snap, a physical sensation like a rope pulled too tight and then released all at once, leaving her staggering. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some pack members looked away out of pity. Others whispered behind their hands, already calculating what this meant for the pack hierarchy, for the position she would lose, for the standing her family would lose alongside her. The pack elder, a stern woman named Ophelia who had overseen every important ceremony for the last 2 decades, stepped forward with her hands folded in front of her. She did not look at Elena with warmth. She looked at her the way one looks at an obstacle that needs to be cleared from the road. "The rejection has been witnessed," Ophelia announced. "By our laws, Elena Voss is no longer bound to the Beta line. She has until dawn to leave pack territory." "Dawn?" Elena finally found her voice, though it came out cracked and thin. "I have lived here my entire life. My mother is buried on this land." "The law does not change for sentiment," Ophelia said. "You know this as well as anyone." Elena looked at Damien one more time, searching his face for some flicker of guilt, some sign that this was tearing him apart, the way it was tearing her apart. She found nothing but relief. He looked lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, and that was somehow worse than any cruelty he could have shown her. He had not been forced into this by pressure from the council, or by some tragic twist of fate. He had simply decided, quietly and deliberately, that a human woman he barely knew was worth more to him than the mate bond he had shared with Elena since the day her wolf first recognized his scent. She refused to give the crowd that satisfaction. Instead, she turned on her heel and walked out of the circle of firelight, her spine straight, her chin lifted, even as her wolf howled inside her, with a grief that felt endless. Behind her, she heard the low murmur of conversation resume, the gathering already moving past her, as if she were a story that had ended, rather than a person who was still standing right there, still breathing, still very much alive and in pain. Her small cabin at the edge of the territory felt foreign to her as she packed. Every object she touched carried a memory, now soured by what had happened at the bonfire. The blanket her mother had woven, the photographs of her and Damien from years earlier, back when his eyes still lit up at the sight of her. She threw most of it into a single duffel bag, unwilling to weigh herself down with reminders of a life that no longer belonged to her. Her best friend, Marisol, appeared at the door, just as she was zipping the bag closed. Marisol's face was pale with anger, her fists clenched at her sides. "I will speak to the council," Marisol said. "This is not right. There has to be an appeal." "There is no appeal for a rejection," Elena said quietly. "You know the law as well as I do." "Then I will come with you." "No." Elena managed a small, sad smile. "You have a family here, a mate, a future. I won't let you throw that away because of me." Marisol pulled her into a tight embrace, and for just a moment, Elena allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she was losing. Then she stepped back, picked up her bag, and walked out to her car without looking back at the cabin, or the packlands beyond it, or the life she had built there since birth. The drive away from the territory was a blur of dark trees and empty road. She did not know where she was going, She only knew she needed to put as much distance as possible between herself and the place where she had been humiliated in front of everyone she had ever known. The radio played something soft and forgettable, and she barely heard it over the sound of her own thoughts, circling endlessly around the same question. What had she done wrong? Had she been too available, too eager, too willing to wait? Or had Damien simply never truly wanted her, using the bond as a convenient arrangement until something else caught his interest? Storm clouds gathered above the mountain pass as she drove further from home, and she welcomed the darkening sky, the way she might welcome an old friend arriving to share in her misery. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets against her windshield, the wipers struggling to keep pace, and still she pressed forward, unwilling to stop, unwilling to think, wanting only to keep moving, until the pain in her chest dulled into something more manageable. She did not notice the warning light on her dashboard until the engine began to sputter. By the time she registered what was happening, the car was already losing power, drifting toward the shoulder of a narrow mountain road with no lights, no houses, and no signal on her phone. She coasted to a stop just past a sharp bend, the engine dying completely, leaving her stranded in the pouring rain in the middle of nowhere, alone, with nothing but her grief and the growing dread of a long, cold night ahead. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel and allowed herself, finally, to cry. The wind howled outside, rocking the car gently, and somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard the cry of another wolf. Though whether it was real or imagined, she could not say. She wiped her eyes and forced herself to sit up straight. Crying would not fix the car. Crying would not undo the rejection. She needed a plan, and she needed one quickly, because the temperature was dropping, and her human clothing offered little protection against a mountain storm in late autumn. She reached for her phone, and saw only one bar of signal flickering weakly at the top of the screen, not nearly enough to place a call. She thought about shifting, about running through the storm in her wolf form to find help, but shifting here, exposed and vulnerable on an unfamiliar road, felt like a risk she was not prepared to take. Instead, she wrapped her jacket tighter around herself and settled in to wait, hoping against hope that another vehicle might pass before the night grew too dangerous. Headlights appeared through the rain, nearly an hour later, cutting through the darkness like twin blades of silver light. Elena's heart leapt with cautious hope as the vehicle slowed, then came to a stop just behind her stalled car. She watched in the rearview mirror as a tall figure stepped out into the storm, moving with an unhurried confidence that seemed entirely unbothered by the weather lashing against him. There was something different about the way he carried himself, something that made her wolf stir cautiously beneath her skin, alert but not afraid. She rolled down her window as he approached, rain immediately soaking through her sleeve. "Car trouble?" he asked. His voice was low, calm, carrying an authority that seemed at odds with the simple question. "Engine gave out," Elena said. "I don't suppose you have a phone signal." "Not out here." He crouched slightly to meet her eyes through the open window, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. Elena felt an unfamiliar warmth pass through her chest, gentle and unexpected, nothing like the frantic ache she had felt for Damien in the years before he rejected her. This was different, quieter, steadier. She did not understand it, and the confusion only added to the exhaustion weighing down her thoughts. "I have a car and a dry cabin about 20 minutes from here," the stranger said. "You are welcome to ride with me until we can arrange a tow for your vehicle." Every instinct told Elena to be cautious. She barely knew this man's name, and the events of the day had already taught her how quickly trust could turn into betrayal. But something about his presence felt safe in a way she could not fully explain, and the storm outside was growing worse by the minute. "I'm Elena," she said finally. "Kane," he replied, offering a hand to help her out of the car. "Let's get you somewhere warm." She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand and stepping out into the rain, unaware that the man beside her carried more power and more secrets than she could possibly imagine, and unaware that this stranded night on a mountain road was about to change the entire course of her life. The warmth of Kane's vehicle wrapped around Elena the moment she settled into the passenger seat, a welcome relief after the biting cold of the storm outside. The heater hummed steadily, and the scent of leather and something faintly like cedar filled the small space between them. She pulled her damp jacket tighter around her shoulders and stole a glance at the man beside her, still trying to understand the strange calm that had settled over her wolf since the moment he arrived. Kane drove with the same unhurried confidence he had shown when stepping out into the storm, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. He did not fill the silence with unnecessary chatter, and Elena found herself grateful for that. After a day of shouting, judgment, and humiliation, the quiet felt like a balm. "You are not from around here," Kane said eventually, breaking the silence without taking his eyes off the road. "No," Elena admitted. "I'm not entirely sure where I'm going, if I'm honest." Running from something, then? It was not quite a question, but Elena felt no urge to deny it. Something about his tone made honesty feel safe rather than dangerous. "Running from someone," she corrected quietly. "My mate rejected me tonight, in front of my entire pack. I don't have anywhere to go." She expected pity, or worse, the kind of awkward silence people offered when they did not know how to respond to pain. Instead, Kane's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and something shifted in his expression, something that looked very much like quiet anger on her behalf. "That is a cruelty I have little patience for," he said. "A bond is not something to discard so easily." "Tell that to him," Elena said, staring out the window at the blur of rain-soaked trees. "He chose a human woman instead." Apparently the years I spent waiting for him meant nothing. Kane was quiet for a long moment, and Elena wondered if she had overshared with a complete stranger, spilling her heartbreak to a man she had known for less than an hour. But when he spoke again, his voice carried none of the judgment she feared. "Some wolves mistake comfort for connection," he said. "A true bond does not need to be built through years of waiting. It reveals itself the moment two wolves recognize each other. If your mate needed 3 years and still chose to look elsewhere, perhaps the bond was never as strong as you believed it to be." Elena turned to study him, surprised by the certainty in his words. "You speak as though you understand mate bonds better than most." "I have had a great deal of time to think about them," Kane said simply, offering no further explanation, and Elena did not press him, sensing that some subjects were not meant to be explored on a first meeting, however strange and significant that meeting had already become. The cabin Kane brought her to was larger and more elegant than she expected, tucked into a private clearing surrounded by tall pines, with warm lights glowing behind thick windows. It did not look like the kind of shelter a passing traveler might keep for emergencies. Everything about it, from the carved wooden door to the fine furniture inside, suggested wealth and permanence, though Elena was too exhausted and too overwhelmed to question it deeply that night. Kane showed her to a guest room with a private bath, offered her dry clothing that fit with suspicious precision, and left her to rest, without asking anything further of her. Alone in the quiet room, Elena sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed her mind to process the strangeness of her situation. 12 hours ago she had been preparing for a simple pack gathering. Now she was sheltering in the private cabin of a man she barely knew, in territory she did not recognize, her wolf strangely calm for the first time since the rejection. She caught her own reflection in the mirror and hardly recognized the woman staring back at her, hollow-eyed and pale, yet somehow steadier than she had any right to be. She thought of Damien's cold announcement, of Nadia's frightened eyes at the edge of the firelight, of Ophelia's unmoved expression as she delivered the sentence of banishment. Then she thought of Kane's quiet anger on her behalf, his certainty that the bond she had lost had never been worth keeping, and something in her chest loosened just slightly, as though a fraction of the weight she carried had been set down for the night. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by fragments of memory and the low murmur of wind outside the cabin walls. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed not of Damien, but of amber eyes watching her from across a firelit room, patient and unwavering, waiting for something she did not yet understand. She woke the next morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of low voices in another room, one of them unmistakably Kane's, calm and measured, the other unfamiliar and clearly deferential. She dressed quickly in the clothing he had left for her and made her way toward the kitchen, curiosity outweighing her exhaustion. The moment she stepped into the doorway, the second man in the room turned toward her and immediately dropped into a formal bow, one arm crossed over his chest. "My lady," he said, his voice tight with respect bordering on reverence. Elena froze in the doorway, glancing between the bowing stranger and Kane, who stood near the counter with an unreadable expression on his face. "I'm sorry," she said slowly. "I think there has been some mistake. I'm no one's lady." The man straightened but said nothing further, his eyes flicking toward Kane, as if awaiting instruction. Kane set down his coffee cup and met Elena's confused gaze with the same calm steadiness he had shown throughout the storm the night before, though something in his expression now suggested he was preparing to reveal a truth he had been carefully withholding. "Elena," he said quietly, "there is something I should have told you last night, and I think it is time you heard it now." Her stomach twisted with sudden unease, the peaceful morning shattering into something far more uncertain, and she braced herself for whatever revelation was about to change everything she thought she understood about the man who had rescued her from the storm. Kane gestured for the other man to leave the room, and once the door clicked shut, he turned back to Elena with an expression she could not quite read, something between caution and quiet resolve. "My name is Kane," he began again, "but that is not the whole truth of who I am. I am the Alpha King. Every pack in this region, including the one you left last night, answers to me, though I rarely make that known when I travel without my guard." Elena stared at him, waiting for some sign that this was a joke, some flicker in his expression that would suggest he was testing her, or teasing her after the trauma of the previous night. But his face remained steady, serious, entirely without humor. "The Alpha King is a legend," she said finally. "A story parents tell pups to explain why the packs remain at peace. He doesn't actually walk among us. He doesn't stop to help stranded travelers on mountain roads." "And yet here I am," Kane said, "having done exactly that." Elena sank into the nearest chair, her mind racing to reconcile the calm, quietly authoritative man who had shared silence with her in the car, with the image of an all-powerful ruler that had been described to her only in old stories. "Why didn't you tell me last night?" "Because last night you needed rescue, not revelation," Kane said. "I did not want my title to shape how you saw the help I offered, or to make you feel obligated to behave a certain way in front of me. You deserved a night of simple kindness, without the weight of who I am attached to it." She appreciated the honesty in his answer, even as her thoughts spun with the implications. If he truly was the Alpha King, then the guard's deep bow made perfect sense, as did the private cabin hidden deep in unfamiliar territory, and the quiet, unshakable confidence he carried like a second skin. "Why are you telling me now?" she asked. Kane was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words with obvious care. "Because since the moment I saw you standing in the rain beside your car, I have felt something I have not felt in longer than I care to admit, a pull, a recognition. My wolf responded to you the way it has never responded to anyone else in all the centuries I have walked this world." Elena's breath caught. She understood immediately what he was describing, though she had believed such a thing had already happened to her once, with Damien, only to have it shattered in front of an entire pack. "You believe I am your mate." "I believe it, and I suspect, if you are honest with yourself, that some part of you has felt it too," Kane said. "The calm you felt in my presence last night, the way your wolf settled rather than panicked. That is not something easily explained by mere kindness." She wanted to argue, to insist that her wolf had simply been exhausted and grateful for shelter, nothing more. But even as the protest formed in her mind, she knew it rang hollow. She had felt something shift the moment he stepped out of his vehicle into the storm, something entirely different from the frantic longing she had spent 3 years directing toward Damien, something steadier and more certain than anything she had experienced before. "This is a great deal to accept in one morning," she admitted. "Less than a day ago I was rejected by the mate I waited years for. Now you are telling me I have somehow found a truer bond with the most powerful wolf in existence." "I understand the weight of it," Kane said gently. "I am not asking you to accept everything at once. I am only asking that you allow yourself to consider it, and to stay here, safely, while we determine what comes next." Before she could respond, the guard who had bowed to her earlier reappeared at the doorway, his expression tight with urgency. "My king, forgive the interruption, but word has reached the outer patrol. Riders from the Voss Pack territory are approaching the border, asking after a woman matching Lady Elena's description." Elena's pulse quickened. She had assumed her departure from the pack was final, that no one would come looking for her after the humiliation of the banishment. The thought that someone might already be tracking her filled her with a fresh wave of anxiety, uncertain whether they intended to help her or drag her back to face further judgment. Kane's expression hardened slightly, the calm authority in his posture sharpening into something more commanding. "Bring them to the outer gate, but do not allow them onto the grounds until I have spoken with them myself," he instructed the guard, who nodded sharply, and disappeared to carry out the order. "Who would be looking for me?" Elena asked, though the question was mostly rhetorical. She could think of only one person likely to send riders after her, and the possibility filled her with a complicated mixture of dread and reluctant hope. "We will find out together," Kane said, offering his hand to help her rise from the chair. "Whatever this is, you no longer face it alone." She hesitated only a moment before accepting his hand, unsure whether the riders approaching the border carried news of forgiveness, further cruelty, or something else entirely, but grateful, for the first time since the bonfire, that she did not have to face whatever came next by herself. The border gate stood at the edge of Kane's private grounds, a tall iron structure flanked by 2 guards, who straightened immediately as Kane approached with Elena close behind him. Beyond the gate, 3 riders sat astride their horses, their expressions tense with the kind of nervous energy that came from crossing into territory they clearly did not fully understand. Elena recognized none of the riders at first glance, though as they drew closer, she realized the middle rider was Garrick, one of the senior enforcers from her former pack, a man loyal to Damien's authority and unlikely to be present unless sent on official business. Her stomach tightened with dread. "State your purpose," one of Kane's guards called out, his voice sharp with authority. Garrick dismounted slowly, clearly uneasy about the unfamiliar power radiating from the grounds before him. "We are searching for a member of the Voss pack, a woman recently released from her mate bond. We tracked her vehicle to this region. She is no longer bound to answer to your pack," Kane said, stepping forward with quiet but unmistakable authority. Garrick's eyes widened as recognition dawned, and he dropped immediately into a deep bow, the other 2 riders following suit a heartbeat later. "My king," Garrick said, his voice tight with sudden nerves. "Forgive us. We did not realize we were trespassing on your grounds." "Why does your pack seek Elena Voss?" Kane asked, his tone giving nothing away, though Elena noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, as if he were prepared to intervene the moment the answer displeased him. Garrick hesitated, glancing briefly at Elena before answering. "Beta Damien sent us. There have been concerns raised among the elders regarding the manner of the rejection. Some believe proper procedure was not followed, and there is worry the ritual may not have been completed correctly." Elena's heart pounded at the implication. If the rejection ritual had not been properly completed, it was possible, however unlikely, that some vestige of the old bond remained active, a legal complication that could tie her fate to Damien's decisions even now. "And what does your beta intend to do about this concern?" Kane asked. "He wishes to speak with her directly," Garrick said, "to resolve the matter formally, so there can be no dispute later regarding pack succession or property claims tied to the incomplete bond." Elena felt a flare of anger cut through her fear. Even now, even after publicly humiliating her in front of the entire pack, Damien's concern was not for her well-being, but for the legal tidiness of his own new arrangement with Nadia. He did not care whether she was safe or whole. He cared only that no loose thread might unravel the future he had chosen for himself. "He can resolve his concerns through proper channels," Kane said, his voice cooling several degrees. "Elena Voss is under my protection now. Any communication regarding pack matters will go through me directly, and I expect it to be conducted with far more respect than she was shown at her rejection ceremony." Garrick's face paled slightly at the clear warning embedded in Kane's words. "Understood, my king. I will relay the message." "See that you do," Kane said, and with a final glance toward Elena, the enforcer and his companions remounted their horses and rode back the way they had come, leaving a tense silence in their wake. Elena let out a slow breath she had not realized she was holding. "They came for legal reasons, not for me." "I know," Kane said, turning to face her fully. "And I am sorry that even now, after everything, your former pack cannot see past their own convenience to recognize what they have lost." "I keep waiting to feel devastated by that," Elena admitted, "but mostly, I just feel tired. Tired of being someone's inconvenience to manage." Kane studied her carefully, something protective flickering behind his calm expression. "You will never be an inconvenience here. I meant what I said. You are under my protection, and I do not offer that lightly." As they walked back toward the cabin together, Elena found herself considering, for the first time without immediate panic, the strange possibility that the disaster of the previous night might have led her somewhere entirely unexpected, somewhere that did not yet feel like home, but no longer felt like exile either. That evening, over a quiet dinner prepared by members of Kane's household staff, Elena found herself studying the man across from her with newfound curiosity. The revelations of the day, his true identity, the encounter with Garrick, the protective authority he had shown at the gate, had shifted something in how she viewed him, though she still struggled to reconcile the powerful ruler with the calm, patient stranger who had rescued her from the rain. "May I ask you something?" she said, setting down her fork. "Of course. You said your wolf responded to me the moment you saw me, centuries without such a bond, and it happens on a random mountain road during a storm. Doesn't that strike you as an extraordinary coincidence?" Kane considered the question seriously, as he seemed to consider everything. "I have learned, over a very long life, that the bonds which matter most rarely arrive with warning. They simply arrive, precisely when they are needed, whether we are prepared for them or not." "That sounds like something out of an old story," Elena said, though not unkindly. "Perhaps," Kane allowed, "but I have lived long enough to know that some old stories carry more truth than the modern world gives them credit for." She found herself smiling slightly, the first real smile since the bonfire the night before, and something in Kane's expression softened at the sight of it, as though he had been waiting to see exactly that. "I am not ready to call myself your mate," Elena said carefully. "Not yet. Too much has happened too quickly, and I've been wrong about a bond before." "I would never ask you to rush," Kane said. "Take whatever time you need. I only ask that you allow yourself to stay, to see what unfolds between us without the pressure of the past weighing down every moment." Elena nodded slowly, grateful for his patience even as uncertainty still churned beneath her calm exterior. She did not yet know what the future held, whether the pull she felt toward Kane would deepen into something undeniable, or whether the wounds from Damien's rejection would make it impossible to trust fully again. But for the first time since the humiliation at the bonfire, she felt something other than despair. She felt, cautiously, the first fragile stirrings of hope. Neither of them could have known, as they sat together in the quiet warmth of the cabin, that news of Elena's presence on royal grounds had already begun to spread through the courts, or that the following days would bring challenges neither of them had fully anticipated, from a court unprepared to accept an outsider as their future queen, to a rejected mate, unwilling to accept the loss of what he had so carelessly discarded. The following morning, Kane received word that the royal court had already begun to whisper about the woman staying in his private cabin, and he understood that the quiet peace he had offered Elena over the last 2 days was about to give way to a far more public and far more complicated chapter of her story, one that would test both of their resolve in ways the storm on the mountain road never could. News of Elena's presence at Kane's private estate spread through the royal court faster than either of them anticipated, carried by servants who had noticed the unfamiliar woman being treated with unusual deference, and by the guard captain who had witnessed Garrick's hasty retreat at the border gate. By the time Kane called for a formal council meeting, most of the senior advisors had already formed their own theories about what was happening, few of them accurate, and fewer still generous toward Elena. The council chamber was a grand hall lined with tall windows and dark wood paneling, dominated by a long table where the kingdom's most influential advisors gathered whenever matters of importance required discussion. Elena stood just outside the doors with Kane beside her, her nerves tightening with every passing second. "You do not have to come in with me," Kane said quietly. "I can address this alone and inform you of the outcome afterward." "No," Elena said, straightening her shoulders. "If they are going to discuss my future, I would rather hear it directly than through second-hand reports." Kane studied her for a moment, something like admiration flickering across his face, before nodding and leading her through the heavy doors into the chamber beyond. Conversation stopped abruptly as the assembled advisors turned to look at the newcomer standing beside their king, several exchanging pointed glances that Elena did not need supernatural senses to interpret. An older man with silver hair and sharp, calculating eyes rose first from his seat at the table. Elena would later learn his name was Vance, the senior advisor who had served 3 generations of Alpha Kings and considered himself the unofficial guardian of royal tradition. "My king," Vance said, his tone carefully neutral, though his gaze lingered on Elena with obvious skepticism. "We had hoped to discuss the matter of your recent guest, before rumors grew any further out of hand. Then let us discuss it plainly, Kane said, taking his seat at the head of the table, while gesturing for Elena to stand beside him, rather than at a distance. This is Elena Voss. My wolf has recognized her as my true mate. The chamber erupted into a low murmur of disbelief and hushed debate. Vance's expression tightened further, though he maintained his composure. Forgive my bluntness, my king, but the timing of this claim raises concern. We understand the woman was rejected by her previous mate only 2 nights ago. Some among the council worry this bond may be a product of grief and vulnerability, rather than a genuine recognition. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication, but before she could respond, Kane spoke first, his voice calm but edged with steel. I have lived for centuries without my wolf responding to another, the way it responded to Elena, within moments of our meeting, he said. I am not a young wolf mistaking sympathy for a bond. I know precisely what I felt, and I will not have my judgment questioned on the basis of assumptions about her emotional state. With respect, Vance pressed, the court has expectations regarding a future queen. Elena Voss has no royal lineage, no formal training in court matters, and comes to us fresh from public humiliation within her own pack. There are those who will question whether she is fit to stand beside you. The room fell silent, waiting to see how Elena would respond to the pointed challenge. She felt her pulse quicken, old insecurities threatening to rise to the surface, the same doubts Damien's rejection had planted so deeply within her. But she thought of the calm strength Kane had shown at the border gate, the quiet dignity with which he carried himself even under scrutiny, and she found her own voice steadying in response. I did not ask to be brought here, and I did not seek out a crown, Elena said, meeting Vance's gaze directly. But I have spent my entire life proving myself within my former pack, training, serving, protecting territory borders, long before anyone considered me worthy of a title. If the council doubts my fitness, I welcome the opportunity to prove otherwise through action rather than assumption. Something shifted in the room at her response, a few of the advisors exchanging surprised glances, clearly not expecting such composed defiance from a woman they had assumed would be overwhelmed by the pressure of the chamber. Even Vance's expression flickered with something that might have been grudging respect, though he did not abandon his skepticism entirely. Bold words, Vance said. We shall see whether they are matched by action. They will be, Kane said firmly, ending the exchange with clear finality. I did not call this council to seek permission. I called it to inform you of my intentions. Elena will remain under my protection, and in time, she will be formally recognized as my mate and future queen. I expect the court to extend her the respect that position deserves. The meeting continued for some time afterward, discussing logistics, security arrangements, and the eventual public announcement that would need to be made. But Elena found her thoughts drifting away from the details, focusing instead on the surprising steadiness she had found within herself when challenged. Damien's rejection had left her doubting her own worth, questioning whether she had ever truly deserved the position she once held within her pack. But standing in this unfamiliar chamber, facing the skepticism of an entire royal court, she had discovered a resilience she did not know still existed within her. As the council meeting drew to a close, Vance approached her privately, his expression unreadable. I meant no personal insult, Lady Voss. My concern is for the stability of the throne, nothing more. I understand, Elena said, and I intend to earn whatever trust you are willing to extend, rather than demand it. Vance studied her for a long moment, before offering a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Perhaps the king's judgment is not so hasty as I first assumed. It was not quite an endorsement, but it was far more than Elena had expected, and as she left the council chamber beside Kane, she allowed herself a small measure of pride at having weathered the first true test of her new and uncertain path, even as she knew, deep down, that greater challenges still lay ahead. Word of the council meeting spread through the kingdom within days, and inevitably, it reached the borders of the Voss pack, carried by traveling merchants and gossiping enforcers, eager to share news of such a dramatic turn of events. Damien received the report while standing in the same clearing where he had rejected Elena only days earlier, and the reaction that settled over him was nothing like the relief he had expected to feel. At first, he dismissed the news as exaggeration, refusing to believe that the woman he had so publicly cast aside could possibly have secured the attention of the Alpha King himself. But as more detailed accounts arrived, confirming that Elena now resided at the royal estate under Kane's personal protection, with formal recognition as his mate already discussed among the council. A cold unease began to spread through Damien's chest, one he did not fully understand, until Nadia asked him directly why he had grown so quiet and distracted. "It's nothing," he told her, though the lie felt hollow even as he spoke it. In truth, it was not nothing. Damien had spent 3 years believing himself fortunate to have Elena as his intended mate, a capable, respected wolf, who had never once given him reason for complaint. He had grown restless anyway, drawn to the novelty of Nadia's human world, her lack of pack politics, the freedom of a relationship untangled from centuries of tradition and expectation. He had convinced himself that rejecting Elena was an act of honesty rather than cruelty, that she would recover, find someone else, move on from what he considered a minor disruption in her otherwise stable life. He had not considered that she might rise, instead, to a position so far above his own, that the rejection he had delivered so carelessly would follow him for the rest of his life, as the single greatest misjudgment he had ever made. "You look troubled," Nadia said again, settling beside him with evident concern. "The woman I rejected," Damien said slowly. "She has apparently caught the attention of the Alpha King." Nadia's eyes widened. "The king himself. Is that even possible?" "I don't know," Damien admitted. "I didn't think it was, until now." He tried to convince himself the news did not matter, that his life with Nadia remained unaffected by whatever happened to Elena in the royal court. But as the days passed, he found himself increasingly distracted, replaying the bonfire ceremony in his mind, wondering if he had been too hasty, too certain of his own judgment, too willing to discard something valuable for the sake of novelty. His father, the pack's aging alpha, called him into a private meeting once the rumors reached his ears as well, his expression grim with concern that had nothing to do with sentiment and everything to do with political consequence. "Do you understand what you have done?" his father demanded. "If the Alpha King formally claims her as his mate, our pack's standing within the greater territories could be affected. He may remember, quite clearly, how carelessly we discarded a woman he now considers precious." "I did not know," Damien said, though the excuse sounded weak, even to his own ears. "You should have considered every possibility before humiliating her in front of the entire pack," his father snapped. "Now we must hope the king's favor does not turn into resentment against our territory as a whole." Damien left the meeting with his father's warning echoing in his mind, the full weight of his decision finally settling over him in a way it had not during the heat of his infatuation with Nadia. He had not simply broken a bond, he had, quite possibly, created an enemy of the most powerful wolf in existence, one who now had every reason to view the Voss pack with suspicion rather than respect. That night, unable to sleep, he found himself standing at the edge of the same clearing where he had once bonded with Elena, staring at the dying embers of a long-extinguished fire, wondering, for the first time since the ceremony, whether he had truly understood the value of what he had thrown away until it was already gone. Meanwhile, at the royal estate, Elena remained blissfully unaware of the turmoil unfolding within her former pack, focused instead on adjusting to her strange new circumstances and the growing certainty within her own heart that the bond forming between herself and Kane was unlike anything she had ever known before. 3 weeks passed at the royal estate, and Elena found herself gradually settling into a rhythm entirely different from anything she had known within the Voss pack. Mornings were spent training alongside members of the royal guard, sharpening skills she had let grow rusty during her years of quiet waiting for a bond that never fully materialized. Afternoons often found her in Kane's company, walking the extensive grounds or sharing quiet meals, the ease between them deepening with each passing day. Despite the growing comfort, doubt still lingered beneath the surface of Elena's newfound peace. One evening, as they sat together on a stone bench overlooking the estate's private gardens, she finally voiced the fear she had been carrying since her arrival. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong," she admitted quietly, "for you to look at me one day and realize this was all a mistake, the way Damien did." Kane turned to face her fully, his expression softening with an understanding that felt deeply personal rather than merely sympathetic. "I understand why that fear lives within you, but I am not Damien, and what I feel for you is not comparable to whatever fleeting attachment he mistook for a bond." "How can you be so certain?" Elena asked. "You have known me for 3 weeks." Because I have lived for centuries, Kane said, long enough to recognize the difference between fondness and true recognition. My wolf has never responded to another the way it responds to you. Not once, in all the years before we met on that mountain road. Elena studied him carefully, searching for any hint of exaggeration or performance in his words, and finding none. Still, the wounds Damien had left behind were not so easily healed by reassurance alone. I was so certain about him too, she admitted. I trusted the bond completely, and it still ended in humiliation. I don't know how to trust something this deeply again, without fearing the same outcome. Kane reached over and gently took her hand, his touch warm and steady. I will not ask you to simply trust my words. I will ask you to give me time to prove them, through action, rather than promises alone. If there comes a day when you feel that trust has been earned, I will know it by the way you look at me, without the shadow of fear you carry now. His patience, so different from the impulsive coldness Damien had shown, settled something deep within Elena's chest. She found herself, in that quiet moment beneath the darkening sky, allowing herself to imagine a future she had not dared to consider since the night of her rejection, one built not on obligation or convenience, but on genuine recognition and mutual respect. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching along the garden path. One of Kane's guards appeared, his expression tense with urgency that immediately drew both their attention. My king, forgive the intrusion, the guard said, bowing quickly. A messenger has arrived from the Voss Pact territory, requesting an urgent audience regarding Lady Elena. Elena's stomach tightened with unease. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that her former pack would simply fade into the background of her new life, leaving her free to build something untouched by the past. The arrival of another messenger suggested otherwise. Who sent them? Kane asked, his relaxed posture shifting immediately into something more alert and commanding. Beta Damien himself, my king. He requests to speak with Lady Elena directly, claiming the matter is of great personal importance. Elena felt a complicated mixture of anger and apprehension settle over her at the mention of Damien's name. Part of her wanted nothing more than to refuse any contact with him ever again, to leave the pain of that humiliating night firmly in the past where it belonged. But another part of her, the part still healing from months of uncertainty, felt a flicker of curiosity about what he could possibly want to say to her now, after everything that had happened. Do you wish to see him? Kane asked gently, giving her the choice without pressure or judgment. Elena took a long breath, weighing her own feelings carefully before answering. I think I need to, not for his sake, but for mine. I need to close this chapter properly, on my own terms this time, rather than his. Kane nodded, understanding immediately. Then we will arrange the meeting on our terms, in a setting where you hold every advantage, and where he understands clearly that whatever power he once held over your life no longer exists. As the guard departed to arrange the details, Elena felt a fresh wave of nervous anticipation settle over her, unsure exactly what Damien intended to say, but determined, for the first time since the bonfire ceremony, to face him not as the woman he had discarded, but as someone entirely transformed by everything that had happened since that painful night, someone who no longer needed his approval, or his regret, to feel whole. The meeting was arranged for the following afternoon, in a formal receiving room within the royal estate, designed specifically to remind visitors of exactly whose territory they now stood within. Elena dressed carefully that morning, choosing clothing that reflected quiet confidence, rather than an attempt to impress, understanding instinctively that the woman Damien was about to see needed to look nothing like the one he remembered from the bonfire ceremony. Kane offered to remain present during the meeting, though he made clear the choice belonged entirely to Elena. After some consideration, she decided she wanted him nearby, not because she feared facing Damien alone, but because she wanted her former mate to understand clearly and completely the reality of her new circumstances. Damien arrived precisely on time, accompanied by a single enforcer, who remained stationed near the door, while Damien was led into the receiving room alone. Elena watched his expression shift the moment he saw her, standing tall and composed beside Kane's chair, rather than the broken, humiliated figure he had last seen fleeing the bonfire ceremony in tears. Elena, he said, his voice carrying an uncertainty she had never heard from him before. You look well. I am well, she replied evenly, offering no further warmth than the situation required. Damien glanced briefly at Kane, before returning his attention to Elena, clearly struggling to find the right words for whatever he had traveled so far to say. I wanted to speak with you directly, to apologize for the manner in which I ended our bond. I handled it poorly. You handled it cruelly, Elena corrected calmly. There is a difference. Damien's jaw tightened, though he did not argue the point. You are right, I was cruel, and I have regretted it more than you likely believe. Regret because you hurt me, Elena said, or regret because I am no longer the discarded, powerless woman you assumed I would remain. The question landed with obvious weight, and Damien's silence in response told her everything she needed to know about the true nature of his regret. She had suspected as much before the meeting even began, but hearing her own assumption confirmed by his inability to answer honestly still stung more than she expected. I came to ask for your forgiveness, Damien said finally, and to ask whether there might be some way to repair what was broken between our pacts, given your new position. Elena studied him for a long moment, understanding fully, for the first time, the true purpose behind his sudden desire to make amends. He was not here for her. He was here for the political consequences her elevated status now threatened to impose upon his own pact's future. I forgive you, Elena said slowly, watching relief flash briefly across his face, before she continued. Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry the weight of your cruelty any longer than necessary. However, forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and it certainly does not mean I intend to smooth over the political consequences of your own choices on your behalf. Elena, please, Damien began, but Kane rose from his seat at that moment, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. I believe this conversation has run its course, Kane said, his tone polite but final. Elena has offered you the forgiveness you sought. Whatever consequences your pact faces moving forward will be determined through proper diplomatic channels, not through personal appeals to a woman you have already wronged enough. Damien bowed his head slightly, recognizing the dismissal for what it was. Thank you for your time, Elena. I hope you find happiness. I already have, Elena said simply, and watched as something like genuine regret finally settled fully across Damien's expression before he turned and left the receiving room, escorted out by the waiting enforcer. Once the doors closed behind him, Elena allowed herself a long, slow breath, releasing tension she had not realized she was holding throughout the entire exchange. Kane moved to stand beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder in silent support. How do you feel? He asked quietly. Lighter, Elena admitted, surprised by how true the word felt. I think I needed to see him, as he truly is, motivated by consequence rather than genuine remorse, in order to fully release whatever hold the past still had over me. You handled it with more grace than he deserved, Kane said. Perhaps, Elena said, allowing a small smile to form. But I did it for myself, not for him. I wanted to close that chapter properly, and now I feel ready to focus entirely on whatever comes next, without the weight of unfinished business pulling me backward. As they left the receiving room together, Elena felt a profound sense of closure settle over her, the humiliation of the bonfire ceremony finally losing its grip on her identity. Whatever challenges still lay ahead in her new life at the royal estate, she faced them now as a woman fully freed from her past, ready to embrace whatever future awaited her alongside Kane, without fear of the shadows that had once threatened to define her. In the weeks that followed Damien's visit, Elena noticed a subtle but unmistakable shift within herself. The lingering anxiety she had carried since the bonfire ceremony began to fade, replaced gradually by a quiet confidence she had not felt in years, perhaps not since long before she had ever bonded with Damien in the first place. She continued her training with the Royal Guard, impressing even the most skeptical instructors with her discipline and determination, and she began attending council sessions alongside Kane, slowly earning the respect of advisors who had once doubted her fitness for the role she was preparing to assume. Vance, in particular, softened considerably over those weeks, his skepticism giving way to genuine admiration as he watched Elena navigate court politics with growing skill and composure. I confess, he told her privately after one particularly difficult session, I did not expect you to adapt so quickly to matters most nobles spend years mastering. I have spent my entire life proving myself to people who doubted me, Elena replied. This is simply the latest chapter in that story. Then I suspect it will be your finest chapter yet, Vance said. and Elena found herself genuinely touched by the sincerity in his words. Cain, meanwhile, continued to demonstrate the patient, steady devotion that had first drawn Elena's trust during their initial meeting on the mountain road. He never pressured her to rush toward formal bonding, never made her feel obligated to perform affection she had not yet fully settled into feeling. Instead, he simply remained present, consistent, and genuine in every interaction, allowing trust to build naturally, rather than forcing it through grand gestures or empty promises. One crisp evening, as autumn began to give way to the first signs of winter, Cain invited Elena to join him on the estate's highest terrace, a private space overlooking the entire territory below, the distant mountains catching the last golden light of sunset. "I wanted to ask you something," Cain said, once they had settled into comfortable silence beside each other. "Go ahead," Elena said, sensing the shift in his tone toward something more significant than their usual quiet conversations. "I know you came to me carrying wounds that will take time to fully heal," Cain began carefully. "I have tried, throughout these past weeks, to give you the space and patience you deserved, without pressuring you toward decisions you were not ready to make." "You have," Elena confirmed. "More patience than I ever expected, honestly. But I find myself now needing to ask you directly," Cain continued, turning to face her fully. "Do you believe, in your heart, that the bond between us is real, not because of what I have told you, or what the court expects, but because of what you yourself have felt these past weeks?" Elena considered the question seriously, reflecting on everything that had unfolded since that stormy night on the mountain road. She thought of the calm certainty she had felt in Cain's presence from their very first meeting, so different from the anxious longing she had once mistaken for love with Damien. She thought of his patience, his steadiness, the way he had defended her before the council without hesitation, the way he had stood beside her during the difficult meeting with Damien, offering support without ever overshadowing her own strength. "Yes," she said finally, the word carrying a certainty that surprised even herself. "I believe it. I have believed it for some time now, if I am honest, though I was afraid to say it aloud, afraid that naming it might somehow cause it to slip away, the way my bond with Damien did." Cain's expression softened with quiet relief and unmistakable joy. "It will not slip away," he said softly. "I intend to spend however long it takes proving that to you, for as many years as we are given." "I would like that," Elena said, and for the first time since the humiliation of the bonfire ceremony, she allowed herself to fully embrace the possibility of a future, built on genuine recognition, rather than obligation. A future she had once believed impossible, after everything Damien had taken from her. As the sun disappeared entirely behind the distant mountains, Cain reached for her hand, and Elena did not hesitate to intertwine her fingers with his, the gesture carrying a weight of quiet promise between them. Neither of them spoke further that evening, content simply to sit together beneath the emerging stars, but both understood, without needing words to confirm it, that they had crossed some invisible threshold together, moving from cautious possibility into something far more certain and enduring. Neither of them yet knew that the following morning would bring the formal announcement Cain had been carefully preparing, one that would finally make public what had, until now, remained a private and carefully guarded truth between them, setting into motion the final chapter of Elena's remarkable transformation from a rejected mate to a queen fully deserving of the throne she was about to claim. The following morning, Cain called for a formal gathering of the entire royal court, far larger and more significant than the private council session Elena had faced weeks earlier. Word had already begun spreading through the territory that an important announcement was imminent, and by midday, the great hall of the royal estate, filled with advisors, dignitaries, and representatives from pacts throughout the region, all eager to witness whatever news their king intended to share. Elena stood beside Cain at the front of the hall, dressed in deep emerald fabric that Vance himself had insisted was appropriate for the occasion, her nerves steadied by the quiet strength Cain radiated beside her. She scanned the crowd briefly, noting unfamiliar faces from distant territories alongside more familiar figures from the royal council, all watching with rapt attention as Cain raised his hand to call the room to silence. "I have called you here today," Cain began, his voice carrying easily through the vast hall, "to formally announce what many of you have already suspected. My wolf has recognized its true mate, after centuries without such a bond. I intend to claim Elena Voss not only as my mate, but as queen of these territories, standing beside me as an equal partner in all matters concerning our people." A ripple of reaction spread through the crowd, some expressions filled with genuine excitement, others more reserved, clearly still processing the unprecedented nature of the announcement. Elena kept her chin lifted, refusing to let the weight of so many watching eyes shake the confidence she had worked so hard to rebuild over the past weeks. "I understand," Kane continued, "that some among you may have concerns regarding her lineage, or the unconventional circumstances of our meeting. I would ask that you set aside those concerns, and instead observe, in the months ahead, the strength, wisdom, and dedication Elena brings to this role. I have witnessed it myself, repeatedly, and I have no doubt the rest of you will witness it as well." A representative from one of the northern territories stepped forward hesitantly, clearing his throat before speaking. "My king, we mean no disrespect, but tradition dictates that a future queen undergo formal trials to prove her capability before the full court. Would Lady Elena be willing to demonstrate her fitness in such a manner?" Before Kane could respond, Elena stepped forward herself, meeting the representative's gaze directly. "I welcome any trial the court deems necessary. I have spent my entire life proving my worth to those who doubted me, and I see no reason to stop now, simply because the stakes have grown larger." Her willingness to accept the challenge, rather than hide behind Kane's authority, sent a fresh wave of murmured approval through the hall, and even the skeptical northern representative offered a respectful nod in response. Vance, standing near the front of the assembled council, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile, clearly pleased to see his earlier doubts about Elena's capability so thoroughly addressed by her own confident response. "Then it is settled," Kane announced. "Elena will undergo the traditional trials expected of any future queen, and I have no doubt whatsoever that she will exceed every expectation placed before her." The formal announcement concluded with a wave of applause and murmured conversation as the gathered court began discussing the implications of what they had just witnessed. Elena felt Kane's hand find hers briefly beneath the cover of the podium, a silent gesture of support and pride that meant more to her than any of the applause filling the hall around them. As the crowd began to disperse, a familiar figure approached from the back of the hall, someone Elena had not expected to see among the assembled dignitaries. Marisol, her closest friend from the Voss pack, pushed through the remaining crowd with tears already forming in her eyes. "I heard the news, and had to see it for myself," Marisol said, pulling Elena into a tight embrace the moment she was close enough. "I am so happy for you. After everything that happened, you deserve every bit of this." "I did not know you would be here," Elena said, genuinely moved by her friend's presence. "I would not have missed this for anything," Marisol said. "Besides, someone needs to make sure this royal court treats you properly, and I intend to remind them regularly of exactly how remarkable you are." Elena laughed, the sound light and genuine, a stark contrast to the heavy sorrow that had defined her departure from the pack weeks earlier. Standing there, surrounded by her closest friend, the man who had shown her what genuine recognition truly felt like, and a court slowly warming to the possibility of her leadership, Elena finally allowed herself to fully believe that the disaster of her rejection had led her, against every expectation, toward a future far greater than anything she had imagined for herself within the confines of her former pack. As the day drew to a close, Kane found a quiet moment to pull Elena aside, away from the lingering crowd of well-wishers and curious onlookers. "The trials will not be easy," he warned gently. "Some among the court will use them as an opportunity to test you harshly, hoping to prove their earlier doubts correct." "Let them try," Elena said, her confidence unwavering. "I did not survive humiliation and rebuild myself from nothing, simply to falter now, when everything I have ever wanted finally feels within reach." Kane studied her with obvious pride and affection, brushing a strand of hair gently away from her face. "I believe, more than ever, that you will not simply pass these trials, you will redefine what this court believes a queen can be." Elena smiled, drawing strength from his unwavering belief in her, and together, they turned to face whatever challenges the coming weeks would bring, ready to confront the trials ahead, not as obstacles to fear, but as opportunities to prove, once and for all, that the woman Damien had so carelessly discarded had become someone far too strong and far too capable to ever be underestimated again. The trials began 3 days later, structured across a series of demanding challenges, designed to test every aspect of a future queen's fitness to rule alongside the Alpha King. The first trial, held within the estate's expansive training grounds, required Elena to demonstrate combat proficiency against several of the kingdom's most skilled enforcers, a test meant to prove she could physically defend both herself and the territory should the need ever arise. Elena had trained relentlessly in the days leading up to the trial, pushing herself harder than she had in years, determined to silence any lingering doubts among the watching council members. When the day arrived, she faced her first opponent with steady focus, drawing on skills honed over years of border patrol duty within her former pack, skills that had rarely been tested against opponents of this caliber. The match was fierce, blows exchanged rapidly, as Elena's opponent tested her defenses with calculated precision. She stumbled once, early in the exchange, drawing a sharp intake of breath from the watching crowd, but she recovered quickly, using the momentary opening to press her own advantage, and ultimately secure victory, through a combination of strategy and controlled strength rather than brute force alone. The crowd's reaction shifted noticeably as the trial continued through subsequent rounds, skepticism giving way gradually to genuine respect as Elena defeated opponent after opponent, never relying solely on aggression, but demonstrating instead the kind of tactical intelligence that suggested a mind suited not just for combat, but for leadership itself. Vance, observing from the sidelines alongside the rest of the council, leaned toward a fellow advisor with quiet approval. "She fights like someone who has spent years being underestimated," he murmured, "and she clearly intends never to be underestimated again." The second trial tested diplomatic skill, requiring Elena to mediate a staged dispute between representatives from two rival territories, each presenting deliberately exaggerated grievances designed to test her patience, wisdom, and ability to find fair resolution under pressure. Elena approached the exercise with the same careful consideration she had shown during her earlier council appearances, listening fully to each side before offering a resolution that acknowledged both parties' concerns, while firmly upholding principles of fairness that even the most skeptical observers found difficult to challenge. By the time the third and final trial arrived, a test of endurance requiring Elena to lead a small group through a demanding wilderness course while making critical decisions under simulated pressure, the mood among the gathered court had shifted almost entirely in her favor. Even those who had approached the trials with the intention of finding fault in her performance found themselves instead impressed by her composure, adaptability, and genuine care for those under her guidance throughout the exercise. When the trials concluded, Kane called the court together once more to formally announce the results, though by that point, the outcome felt almost like a formality, given how thoroughly Elena had proven herself throughout the preceding days. "Elena Voss has completed every trial demanded of her," Kane announced, "not merely meeting expectations, but exceeding them, in ways that leave no doubt whatsoever regarding her fitness to stand as queen alongside me. I hope this court now recognizes what I have known since the very night we met, that she possesses strength, wisdom, and character, deserving of the highest respect this kingdom can offer." The hall erupted into genuine applause this time, free of the earlier hesitation and skepticism that had marked the initial announcement weeks before. Even the northern representative who had first requested the trials approached Elena afterward, offering a respectful bow. "I confess I doubted whether any newcomer could meet the standards our tradition demands," he said. "You have proven me thoroughly wrong, and I look forward to serving under your future leadership." "Thank you," Elena said, genuine warmth in her voice. "I hope to continue earning that trust in the years ahead, not simply through trials, but through the choices I make each day as queen." As the celebration continued around them, Kane found Elena's hand once more, drawing her slightly away from the crowd toward a quiet corner of the hall. "You have done something remarkable," he said softly. "You have transformed the doubts of an entire court into genuine respect, in a matter of days." "I had a great deal of motivation," Elena replied, smiling. "I refuse to ever again be seen as someone easily discarded or underestimated." "You never will be," Kane said firmly. "Not while I stand beside you, and not because of anything I could offer, but because you have proven, entirely through your own strength, exactly what you are capable of." With the trials successfully completed, preparations began almost immediately for the formal bonding ceremony that would unite Elena and Kane not only as mates, but as king and queen ruling together over all the territories beneath the crown. Elena felt a quiet, steady joy settle over her as the preparations unfolded around her, a stark contrast to the anxious uncertainty that had defined her life in the weeks following her rejection. She was no longer the woman abandoned beside a stranded car in a mountain storm. She had become someone entirely transformed, ready to claim a future far beyond anything she had once imagined for herself. The night of the formal bonding ceremony arrived beneath a clear autumn sky, the full moon rising bright and luminous above the royal estate. As preparations reached their final stages, Elena stood in a private chamber, surrounded by attendants who had spent the afternoon preparing her for the most significant moment of her new life. While outside, the entire court gathered within a private garden, specifically chosen for the ceremony's sacred significance. Marisol remained by her side throughout the preparations, her presence a comforting reminder of the life Elena had left behind, even as she prepared to step fully into the one awaiting her. "You look radiant," Marisol said, adjusting the delicate fabric draped across Elena's shoulders. "Nothing like the woman who fled the bonfire that night." "I feel different," Elena admitted, "stronger, more certain of who I am and what I deserve." "You always deserved this," Marisol said firmly. "It simply took the right person to recognize it." As the appointed hour approached, Elena made her way toward the private garden where Cain waited, the assembled court forming a respectful circle around the sacred space reserved for the ceremony. Unlike the harsh public humiliation of her rejection weeks earlier, this gathering carried an entirely different energy, warmth and anticipation, replacing the cold judgment she had once faced beneath a similar night sky. Cain stood at the center of the garden, dressed formally for the occasion, his expression softening with unmistakable emotion the moment he saw Elena approaching. She felt her own heart steady at the sight of him, the same calm certainty she had felt from their very first meeting, settling firmly over her nerves. Vance, who had been chosen to oversee the formal proceedings given his standing within the court, stepped forward as Elena took her place before Cain, the assembled crowd falling silent in anticipation. "Tonight, beneath the light of the full moon, we witness the joining of two wolves, whose bond has already proven itself through trial and test alike," Vance announced, his earlier skepticism now entirely replaced by genuine reverence for the moment unfolding before him. "Let all present bear witness to this sacred union." Cain reached for Elena's hands, holding them gently, as he began the traditional words of bonding, his voice steady with quiet devotion. "I claim you, Elena Voss, not out of obligation or convenience, but out of genuine recognition of the strength, wisdom, and grace you carry within you. My wolf has chosen you, and I choose you as well, fully and without reservation, for as long as we are given." Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes. Though unlike the tears she had shed during her rejection, these carried only overwhelming joy. "I accept this bond," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion coursing through her. "I claim you as well, Cain, trusting fully in what my own wolf has recognized since the very night we met. I no longer carry fear of this bond breaking, because I have seen, through every action you have taken, exactly the kind of devotion I once believed I would never find." As the final words of the ceremony were spoken, both of them felt the bond settle fully into place, a warmth spreading through Elena's chest, unlike anything she had experienced during her years with Damien, a certainty that resonated deep within her very core. Her wolf recognized Cain completely now, the connection between them solidified beyond any possibility of doubt or reversal. The assembled court erupted into celebration the moment the ceremony concluded, cheers and applause filling the garden as Cain pulled Elena into a warm embrace. The weight of centuries of loneliness finally lifted from his shoulders. Elena laughed through her happy tears, overwhelmed by the completeness of the moment, so different from the devastation she had felt only weeks earlier standing in a similar circle, facing rejection rather than celebration. Word of the completed bonding spread quickly beyond the royal estate, reaching every territory within the kingdom by morning, including the Voss pack, where Damien received the news with a heavy, resigned acceptance of everything he had lost through his own careless choices. He understood now, fully and completely, that whatever chance he once had to build a future with Elena had been irrevocably destroyed the moment he chose momentary novelty over the steady, genuine bond they had shared for years, a mistake he would carry with him for the rest of his life. But within the royal estate, none of that mattered any longer to Elena. She stood beside Cain beneath the bright autumn moon, surrounded by a court that had come to respect and celebrate her, finally free of the shadow her rejection had once cast over her identity. She had arrived at this kingdom as a woman discarded and humiliated, uncertain of her worth or her future. She stood now as a queen, fully recognized, fully claimed, and fully certain of the strength and resilience that had carried her through every challenge along the way. The morning of Elena's coronation arrived with a crispness in the air that seemed to mirror the significance of the day ahead. The sky above the royal estate a clear, brilliant blue that stretched endlessly over the gathered crowds, already filling the ceremonial grounds hours before the scheduled event. Representatives from every territory within the kingdom had traveled to witness the formal crowning of their new queen, filling the grounds with a diversity of faces and traditions that spoke to the vast reach of Cain's rule. Elena stood in the same private chamber where she had prepared for her bonding ceremony weeks earlier, though the atmosphere surrounding her preparations now carried an entirely different weight. This was not simply a personal union between herself and Cain. This was the formal recognition of her authority over an entire kingdom, a responsibility she intended to honor with every ounce of dedication she possessed. Marisol, once again by her side, carefully adjusted the deep blue ceremonial robe draped over Elena's shoulders, the fabric embroidered with silver thread depicting the phases of the moon, a traditional symbol of the bond between mates chosen to rule together. I still remember the night you arrived at my door, packing your bag, refusing to let anyone see you cry, Marisol said softly. Look at you now. I could not have imagined this outcome, Elena admitted, studying her own reflection in the mirror before her, hardly recognizing the composed, confident woman staring back at her. Not in my wildest hopes. Sometimes the worst nights lead us toward the futures we were always meant to find, Marisol said, squeezing her hand gently. You simply had to survive long enough to discover it. As the appointed hour arrived, Elena made her way toward the grand hall where the coronation would take place, the weight of the ceremonial robe settling comfortably over her shoulders as she walked with steady, deliberate steps through the corridors of the estate that had become her home. She thought, briefly, of the frightened woman who had once climbed out of a stalled car during a violent storm, uncertain of her future, uncertain of her worth. That woman felt like a distant memory now, replaced entirely by the confident queen preparing to accept a crown she had earned through resilience, strength, and genuine recognition, rather than mere circumstance. The grand hall fell completely silent as Elena entered, walking the long central aisle toward the raised platform where Cain waited, dressed in formal attire befitting the significance of the occasion. Vance stood beside him, holding the ceremonial crown that had been carefully prepared for this moment, his expression carrying none of the skepticism that had once defined his interactions with Elena, replaced instead by clear and genuine pride. As Elena ascended the platform steps, she caught sight of familiar faces scattered throughout the crowd, Marisol standing proudly near the front, several members of the royal guard she had trained alongside during her preparation, and even a few representatives from distant territories who had once doubted her fitness for this role, now watching with clear respect and anticipation. She also noticed, standing near the back of the hall, a smaller group of visitors from the Voss Pack territory, sent to formally witness the coronation as a gesture of continued diplomatic relations. Among them, unmistakably, stood Damien, his expression carrying a complicated mixture of regret and resigned acceptance, as he watched the woman he had once rejected, prepare to accept the highest honor the kingdom could offer. Elena met his gaze briefly across the crowded hall, and unlike the anger or lingering hurt she might once have felt, she found only a quiet, peaceful closure settling over her. Whatever pain his rejection had once caused her, no longer held any power over her identity. She had transformed that devastating night into the foundation of an entirely new and far greater future, one Damien could only watch from a distance, having forfeited any claim to a place beside her. Cain took her hand as she reached the top of the platform, turning to face the assembled crowd together. Vance stepped forward, lifting the ceremonial crown carefully. Today, we crown Elena Voss as queen of these territories, Vance announced, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. A woman who has proven, through trial and unwavering strength, that she is fully deserving of the throne she now accepts. Let all present bear witness to her reign. As the crown settled gently onto Elena's head, A wave of applause and celebration erupted through the hall, echoing across the grounds beyond, as the news spread quickly to those unable to fit within the ceremonial space itself. Elena felt the weight of the crown settle comfortably, a physical representation of everything she had overcome, and everything she had earned through her own resilience and grace. Cain turned to face her fully, pride and love evident in every line of his expression. "Queen Elena," he said softly, meant only for her ears, amid the celebration surrounding them. "You have transformed not only your own life, but the future of this entire kingdom, through your strength and grace." "We transformed it together," Elena corrected gently, "though I could not have found this path without the patience and devotion you showed me from that very first night." As they turned together to face the celebrating crowd, hands intertwined, crown gleaming beneath the bright autumn sun, Elena allowed herself to fully embrace the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had arrived at this kingdom broken and humiliated, uncertain of her worth after a devastating rejection. She stood now as a queen, fully claimed, fully respected, and fully at peace with the remarkable transformation her life had undergone. The celebration continued long into the evening, filled with music, feasting, and genuine joy from a court that had come to embrace their new queen wholeheartedly. And as the stars emerged once more above the royal estate, Elena stood beside Cain, watching the celebration unfold around them, grateful beyond words for the storm that had once stranded her on a lonely mountain road, leading her, against every expectation, toward the extraordinary life she now called her own.